Just for today, everything's okay, everything's okay. Never comes again, another day like yesterday. Just for today, everything's okay, everything's okay.
Good morning, everybody. I have one that there are multiple facets to, that you can come at from many, many different directions. And as per my usual, I'm actually cooking this. I have a lot of thoughts on it, but I'm usually cooking it in front of you as I'm sort of talking to you about it. It's congealing and solidifying in my own mind what my thoughts are on it. But I wanted to talk about something that comes up a lot in therapy, comes up a lot in the human condition, comes up a lot in human relationships, relationships between one another, relationships to self, in how we think about being present or how we interact with society, and the ways in which we can be generally good people and do incredible amounts of damage. And when I talk about this, I'm going to give you examples that come from different cultures and genders, et cetera, et cetera. And we want to be really careful. I'm not saying that the examples that I give is because those people are more egregious or because I'm only picking on them. It's just because I can't sit here and spend the next 10 years demonstrating or giving you examples from every social group to demonstrate how this goes wrong. So with all that preamble, what I want to talk about today is related to playing a role. Now we use this word a lot, and I'm going to use the word ritual, and I'll explain to you how I use the word ritual. We use the word role a lot. It happens a lot in business or any place where people formally and officially interact with one another. It's like, oh, you're going to the conference, what role are you playing? Oh, I'm a speaker. Well, I'm putting the conference on. Oh, I'm just a participant. Well, there's things that go along with the role of being a participant, listening respectfully, trying to follow the rules and facilitate a positive experience for yourself and for other people. Right? Anything that you do, roles can be helpful in sort of setting loose but generally respectful boundaries and guidance for how to interact with one another, and for us to be clear, what's going on here. For example, if the roles are not clear and you have someone come in as a participant, and let's say they're not super aware of themselves and they generally are the alpha person in all of the other situations in their life, and they start asking questions and then they share a little bit of their knowledge, and pretty soon they just start taking over a lecture or taking over an activity. Well, that's inappropriate. It's probably offensive to whoever is officially in the role of presenting. And that would be a case in which someone with some role confusion, who was meant to be a participant, starts crossing boundaries and creating problems because they're just not aware of, like, hey, I have this instinct to play the role of the leader, but when I come in as a participant or as a student, I need to know what that means for that role. And it's okay for me to just let go of leadership and just be a student or be a participant. But let's get, so, the point is that roles and knowledge of what a role is and how to play a role and what the boundaries are to a role and how that role interacts with people in other roles is very helpful in facilitating human beings interacting with one another in a lot of complex ways. However, the part of it, naturally, because I'm a therapist, the part I'm going to talk about is the ways in which roles are a place for people to hide. Well, okay, period. Roles can be a place for people to hide, period. Roles can be a place for people to hide deep compulsions, and roles can be a place for people to remain completely unaware of their own humanity and how they impact other people. And when people often come in and ask about mothers or fathers or people who do terrible damage to the next generation, to kids, and it's sometimes almost like are they evil? Are like this level of narcissism, this comes up over and over and over. It's like, are they trying to hurt? But like, do they not care at all? And I go back and forth on the level of awareness, the level of laziness, whether they're aware or not, et cetera, et cetera. But I think a lot of times people are just unaware, and unwilling to really look at their own part. So I'll give you one stereotype. And again, you have to remember that when I'm giving you these stereotypes, I'm giving it to you to demonstrate how a role can be used. And I'm using a concrete known stereotype because people can connect to it and go, oh, yeah, no, I totally know what you're talking about. But you have to be super careful about pathologizing or blaming those people in particular, because we all do this. And I'm only holding up that general example because it's an easy go-to, right? So let's start with one case in which someone playing a role can do an enormous amount of damage. I see this in societies where women are not treated well, they're not raised with respect for self, and the only validation they're given is for their role as a servant to the needs of family or society or whatever. So what ends up happening is you basically abuse and neglect this human being who happens to be female and capable, maybe capable of having kids. And the only place that they're really validated is, let's say, for example, if it's a mother. Okay, this is a mother. Well, there are lots of stereotypes. I'm thinking about maybe the stereotype of the East Coast Jewish mother who is just like relentlessly concerned with only the physical well-being. And it's not even really physical well-being, because sometimes if that person is anxious enough and compulsive enough, it literally becomes a compulsion. It becomes a way that they soothe their own nervous system. So then you get that stereotype of, there could be a young person who maybe broke up with a girlfriend or boyfriend and they're really sad and depressed, and they come to this particular stereotype of a mother, and the mother's like, well, let me make you something to eat, you'll feel better. And of course that young person might feel even more depressed because they have this emotional need, they're dealing with the complexity of life, they're struggling with an attachment issue, blah, blah, blah. And they have this parent who seems incapable of acknowledging or addressing anything other than this very rigid role of, well, I make you food, and when you're sick, I make sure you wear a jacket, and I, blah, blah, blah. And this is a stereotype. You see this across many, many cultures, where women have been pigeonholed and basically invalidated in more flexible roles where we acknowledge their intelligence and their creativity and their ability to respond to complex problems. And we just keep whittling them down until they have this one, and they go through tons of trauma, right? And they become very, very anxious and very compulsive. And so then they operate in this one role, but they do it with this urgency and anxiety and relentless compulsion, such that it does enormous damage to the kids or the people that they're caring for, that they're taking care of, right? And so then I end up with their kids as clients, feeling terribly emotionally abandoned, struggling with anxiety, depression, struggling with eating disorders, struggling to attach to other people, struggling to have deep, meaningful relationships. And they can't figure out why, because they're like, my mother, really loved me and she worked her ass off. Like, you have no idea how hard she worked to make sure we were cared for. But they don't even know what it means to be cared for as a human being, because what they received was, and now I'm going to use the word ritual, was this ritualized symbol of being a loving mother. And I mean ritual, right? So if you go back to some very, very primitive say, primitive tribal culture where life is extremely dangerous and they don't have time to get more deeply into existential type of thinking, you know, blah, 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 you will see people become very ritualistic and very role oriented, right? So the individual differences between how, say, a male child or a female child is, or personality is meaningless. You're a male child, you will hunt. If you do not, there's something wrong with you, and this is going to be a big problem. If you're a female child, you will weave baskets and you will cook food. If this is not your personality, like, that's not even a concept, right? And so then in the dances and in their oral history and whatever, you'll see things being extremely ritualized. What I mean by ritualized is, in the absence of a true present awareness of what life is and the mechanisms of things, and not really having any real predictive ability, right? Not having the ability to go, well, we kind of have an understanding of the weather, and we're not very good at it, but we can have some ability to predict whether it's going to rain. Therefore, I can do whatever I need to do with my crops, or I can shore up my house, or I can do whatever. That provides a little bit of reassurance. But without having that predictive ability, people just ritualize things. I'm going to do this dance, and I'm going to do this prayer, and I hope it protects me against whatever. Or I need rain. I'm going to do this dance, I'm going to do this prayer, and then this thing is going to result. Now, we know, like, basically that's superstition. But ritual is superstition when it's empty of actual awareness and connection, right? Transfer this to prayer. If someone goes to a church and they feel the mystery and the depth and the profundity of it, that this is the house of God. This is the place in which I commune with something so much greater and more profound than me, where I acknowledge and realize humbly how small I am and how lucky I am to be alive, you know, whatever it is, whatever your belief. And I go in there and I pray and I open myself up and I fervently ask to get to commune with God and to receive knowledge or lessons or blessings, whatever God chooses to give to me. And I go to church and do that. There's an awareness and a presence and an actual aware intention of being present to the experience of God through the form of this church and through the form of prayer, whatever that is, whether you kneel, whether you prostrate yourself, whatever the form is not important, but it is the actual awareness. So it can look like ritual, but it is the awareness that makes the ritual come alive. When I say ritual, I'm using it with negative connotations. I mean something where there is no understanding, there is no true connection. There is, in fact, a laziness in it of, well, everyone says that this is what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to go to church. You're supposed to go in there. That means that you're a godlike religious person and you're supposed to pray. So, okay, I'm gonna put it together. I'm gonna go to church. Everyone gets down on their knees. Okay, I'll get down on my knees. Okay, I say these words. This is the words that everyone says. Okay, I said it. Okay, God, I'm good, right? You're just gonna give me what I need. That's what I mean when I say ritual. Ritualistic. Ritual is basically superstition. I have no awareness. I have no actual knowledge of what my position actually is and who I am. And I have no humility of trying to be present to the real thing and communion with the real thing. And I start just imitating these behaviors that I've been told mean something, but I don't know what the meaning is, and I don't even have any intention of it. I just think I'm doing what I'm supposed to do. That's ritualized. And ritual behavior, empty ritual behavior, empty ritualistic, dogmatic behavior is extremely damaging to people around you. Because if it doesn't fit with their needs, and it probably doesn't more often than it does, if you happen to meet their needs accidentally, because every once in a while what they did need was a sandwich. Yes, mom, that actually is what I needed. Like in this moment right now, I was just feeling like I might be pretty depressed about breaking up, and I might be worried about college, and I might be worried about whatever, but actually that does feel good. Well, yeah, maybe every once in a while, but a lot of times that is not what's needed. So the person who rigidly adheres to that ritual is abandoning the person they're interacting with. And they're being lazy, and they're just being like, as long as I do this, you're getting a caring mother. You're getting a caring father. You're getting a caring sibling. No, they're not. You're sitting there laying down in a ritual, in a role that society said, this is your job, we give you this. And you're like, I'm tired, I don't feel like being present, and I'm going to go through the motions of this thing, and then you can't criticize me, right? So before I come back to the finer points of that, of how damaging that is, I want to advocate for what we would call, or what I called, primitive societies that might be superstitious, et cetera, et cetera. I don't mean to morally impugn them. We're all human beings attempting to navigate a massive reality that's overwhelming, that often not only does not have our needs at the heart of how it's operating, it might even accidentally run counter to our needs a lot. If you were on the shore during the tsunami in Sri Lanka or wherever, that tsunami was not personal. It wasn't like, oh, I'm going to kill this person, but your need to not be inundated with water or crushed between two cars or drowned is irrelevant. Like, that thing was not about your needs, and in fact, it was exactly counter to your needs. Now, that's not personal, but that's the way the universe is, right? So let me continue advocating for those primitive societies. There was a story, and forgive me if I mistell it, but I always remember the import of the story, about an island during World War II. Everyone knows, between the Allies and the Axis nations were at war. Essentially, America and Japan and the Pacific were sort of like fighting brutally, island after island. And there was a lot of time spent there. And there was a particular island where there was a primitive peoples who were not heavily exposed to modern society. And the Allies landed there and made a landing strip for their planes. And it was this place where they could land and take off to continue to bring the fight to Japan. And so in doing this and in interacting with the locals, they would bring food and medicine and supplies or whatever. So suddenly these people were receiving these things that revolutionized their society, where they had to scrap to feed themselves and struggle to stave off starvation or whatever. Suddenly they're receiving ample food and items of great interest that help them, and maybe medicine that help with illnesses, like whatever it was. So it's this amazing revolutionary experience. And it happened because these humans, these weird looking humans, would come down in these machines and land here with this stuff. And then, sadly, as happens when technological societies interact with pre-technological societies, the technological society got done with what they were doing and they bailed. And these people had come to rely on this. And they go back to hard times, but now they sort of have this expectation and they don't know what's going on, and they're waiting for this thing that they come to rely on to show up, and it doesn't. And so they flatten out some ground and they dig to make what looks like a runway, and they use some sticks and some coconuts to create the facsimile of landing lights that, the Allies must have put up, whatever. And so they ritualized the behavior. They ritualized the objects that happened to accompany the reception of this bounty of food, this thing that revolutionized their experience. They ritualized it in sort of like an unknowing prayer to, if these things accompanied this, there was a landing strip, there were these lights, there were these objects, and we've recreated objects like that, can we now receive the same thing again? And sadly, I assume they didn't. Okay, whether I got the story right or not, or whether it's accurate or not, is not the point. The point is that I don't want to just sit here and call everyone who engages in ritual lazy, because sometimes it's just people with lack of information struggling to recreate a situation or a scenario in which they received something that they desperately needed, and they don't have the information. They don't understand the complexity of why people landed there and why those people left and where all of that wealth of food comes from and why it was that way and what the cost is in human society, what technological society does to people, and maybe you don't really want that, and blah, like all of that. They don't know. They just knew that this circumstance happened. There were these things, these poles with lights on the top of it, and there was this empty strip of land where these machines came down, and then we got food. So they tried to recreate that. That's ritual. That's what I mean. That's what I mean when I say ritual, is something that we have manualized and repeated a behavior in an attempt to elicit a connection to something that we don't understand. Right? And sometimes that's sincere. In their case, it's sincere. And sometimes there you will see religious people who sincerely mean it. They're like, well, that's what good people do, is like, go to church. So I want to be a good person. That's what I do. But they don't really have any awareness. You can tell that they don't really stop and go, wait, if I really believe this, God is really, really here. And I want to sit and listen. I want to be present to God, and I want to be informed by God. I don't want to just run some program that some other human told me is how it happens. I want to be, if God is real and present to me, I want to be real and present to God and receive guidance, punishment, whatever it is. No, they're just running some ritual because they think that's what it means to have a relationship to God. So I don't want to, in all cases, criticize it or judge it. I do get judgmental as a therapist because when that kind of ritual is driven by neurotic, intense anxiety and trauma and compulsion in a parent, it does enormous damage to the kids. It does more damage often than someone who just gets drunk and gets angry and hits their kids. It's complex trauma. And part of the damage that comes with it is society is so dead to the understanding of it. And we are so heavily defended against acknowledging that parents who are not inherently evil, they're not evil, and parents who do behaviors that we go, whoa, like, what are you complaining? Like, at least your mom makes you a sandwich. Obviously, she cares. That the victims of that behavior get gaslit by society, and people try to convince you that you're really just a shallow, negative person who won't forgive your parents, blah, 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 and you're really just, something's wrong with you. Because people have no idea that there are parents who can be so rigidly, compulsively detached and anxious, and they still want, and this is where you get into narcissistic parents or parents who are extremely emotionally immature. They want credit for being a good parent. They have some kind of scared, detached sense that there's something wrong with them, that they're pretty messed up, that they have a hard time, but they want credit for being a good parent. So what they do is they do these very surface behaviors, because it's really hard for anyone to look at that from the outside and go, wow, you have really emotionally abandoned your child. In fact, what you do is extremely harassing and anxiety inspiring and overwhelming, because the parent can be like, what are you talking about? I worked my whole life. Like every time you were hungry, I fed you. And if you were cold, I got you a jacket. And I never stopped worrying. And these parents say this kind of bullshit. And there are parents who tried and had a primitive understanding and tried to be aware, but there are parents who have completely bailed on any awareness at all. And they'll just check boxes of like, well, I offered to make you a sandwich. I don't know what you're complaining about. And if their adult child or their child comes back and is like, well, I was depressed because my girlfriend, like, I don't know, like I wanted to talk to somebody. Well, I was willing to listen. I don't know what you want me to say. Like, what am I supposed to do about it? Like, you know, I warned you that you shouldn't. And that parent will just talk around it and talk around it and talk around it and talk around it. But what they're doing is they're saying, I get to play my ritualized, role-based position. You have to sign off on it as I'm a good parent, and everyone in society has to sign off on it. And nobody's going to admit that I am in fact completely emotionally abandoning you. I refuse to listen to what you're trying to tell me. I refuse to listen and be present to what you're struggling with. Maybe at the very least, and I will get to what it looks like when you do it right, because I'm not saying parents are supposed to know everything or know how to deal with everything. Sometimes children have very different personalities than parents, and sometimes those personalities go far beyond the awareness of the parent. Like, that's just normal. That doesn't mean that you're a bad parent. But I'll model what it looks like when you do it right, even though you don't know what your child needs. But you get those parents that play that role-based, ritualized behavior. And often, if they're wounded enough and traumatized enough that it's basically obsessive compulsive behavior, they will do it without any triggering. They will literally harass their children by going, I'm solving your need. I'm taking care of your needs. I'm taking care of your needs. I'm taking care of your needs. Are you feeling sick? Do you feel sick? Are you okay? Are you feeling sick? I'm taking care of you need to take a medicine. And they just go on and on and on relentlessly. And that child will become more and more anxious and overwhelmed. They're like, oh my God, like, not only do they have no hope of actually presenting a real need and having a parent be present to their real need and try to hear them out and try to help them in the way that they need, not only are they not going to get that, they're not even going to get neutral. They're going to get this constant harassment that masquerades as a concerned parent. But if that parent was actually concerned, they would stop and watch their child's facial expressions and body language and go, holy shit, I am stressing the fuck out of my kid. And this is not good for anybody. And I'm not doing it for them. I'm doing it for me because I feel super, super anxious. And this actually soothes me because it allows me to play this role. It allows me to abandon my responsibility to be present and aware to myself, to my children, to people around me. I'm just going to bail on reality, and I'm going to compulsively generate this behavior over and over and over and over, no matter what it does to the recipient of my care. And then if anybody is like, hey, your child has needs, it's going to be like, well, I've done everything that I could. I work tirelessly. No, you don't. No, you don't. And you know that you don't. It's a cop-out. It's a cop-out. And at some level, those people in society, and again, I'm beating up on parents because that's where it's most damaging, and it's also where it's most compulsive, because you can get away with it relentlessly with kids, and you go into the workplace and you'll veer out of your boundaries, but you're like, and this is how you know that these people know what they're doing, because they won't do it with people who don't allow it. If it was truly compulsive, they would have no choice. They'd just be doing this. Like someone with tics, it's truly a compulsion. They don't have control. Their brain is just like a computer just running this program that they can't turn off. And those tics are going to run in a meeting. If they're the president and they're giving the state of the address, it's going to happen there. It's going to happen while they're having, like, whatever, right? But these parents in particular further gaslight their kids because they won't do it with other people. They're not doing it with their best friend. They're not doing it in their job. Maybe every once in a while they'll veer, and it's like, oh, how is it that this magically only happens with your kids? Oh, again, it'll be hidden under, well, my child is really difficult and they had these needs and I probably screwed up, but I worked as hard as I could and I did and everybody's going to go, oh my God, it's so hard raising kids. This is a cop-out. It's bullshit. It's bullshit. That person is gaslighting society. That person is gaslighting that child. Actually, they're not gaslighting society. They're trying to make an ally out of society to further gaslight that child, to force that child or adult child to shut up. Don't talk about how you got hurt or abandoned. Because if you do, not only is that parent going to once again go into the victim mode of like, I gave you everything and I worked tirelessly and I don't know how you could blah, 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 right? This move that they do, but society is going to do it too. Because they don't know. They're not there. Like, who in their right mind? Here's a situation is like, I really am super depressed and struggle with suicidal ideation, et cetera, because my mom never took care of me. And in fact, she like stressed me out super, super bad because she was constantly telling me to put on my jacket and would pick up my room for me and was always offering to make me a sandwich. And people are going to be like, you are a selfish asshole. Seriously? And the older generation is going to be like, kids these days, blah, blah, blah. But what these people don't understand is if you were there and you watched this, there would be no confusion in your mind that this is pure out and out harassment. Now, it may not be totally intentional. Like that parent may not be like, I'm going to get up in the morning and I'm just going to wear my kid out. But they certainly don't care that they are. And they're certainly not willing to stop. They're not willing to take information in. Right? So when you get those cases, and I've had those kids as teens, and I've had those adult children at whatever ages, they've spent years telling that parent, and again, I'm going to beat up on the gender just because it gets hidden more with mothers, because we idealize and mythologize women, and that's not good. That's not healthy for women. I'm not saying women have some privilege. That's horrible and shitty. It's the same thing. We idealize and ritualize women. We idealize and ritualize them. We treat them like they're nothing but a role. We treat their body like it's nothing but a receptacle or a thing meant to produce more humans for us, or a thing to titillate men, like whatever. Like, this is not left-wing bullshit. This is just an objective fact that we treat women this way. And then the damage to society is that women who are traumatized badly enough will just retreat into, they'll just accept the role and they'll just retreat into it. And if they're super, super anxious and super compulsive, they'll retreat into that and they will soothe their wound over and over, and they'll soothe their own attachment anxiety, and they'll soothe their own like deeply destroyed self-esteem by just compulsively running these behaviors over and over and over and over and over and over. So when I'm going to, this happens way more often with mothers than it does with fathers. Fathers have a problem with detachment. with abandonment, with emotional abandonment. What that woman is doing is also emotional abandonment, but it's more insidious because the father emotionally abandoning just doesn't show up. Take some job where they're on the road all the time. They're like, well, you know, I had to pay the bills, whatever. And maybe that's true, but then they come home and they're not present to their kids either, whatever it is, right? And society is willing to go, hey man, you were a dick. You were a bad father. And even most of those men are willing to go, I was a bad father. The problem with when we abuse women in this way and we ritualize them and objectify them and give them this very, very narrow role, and they're super traumatized and super, super anxious and compulsive. The problem is that their abandonment of their children is hidden under this massive noise of ritualized care behaviors. I'm taking care of you. 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 I'm taking. I work tirelessly. No, you're not. No, you're not. I understand that you're in this position because something horrible happened to you. And we as a society continue to idealize and ritualize and abandon women. But I am not willing to pretend that what you do has anything to do with love or care. It doesn't. It's aggressive and it's abusive and it's harassing. Don't pretend you're taking care of somebody else. You're taking care of yourself. You feel very, very anxious and you just constantly spinning and running and spinning and running and spinning and running. And then you feel a little bit better if you can just do these behaviors that society has signed off and says, that's you're a caring wife or you're a caring, whatever. And there are men who do this too. That isn't about your kids. You're not taking care of your kids. You're taking care of yourself. That's okay. Like, I was super traumatized. I contributed almost nothing to society for decades. And in fact, was probably more of a problem than I was. I don't blame you. But I do hold you responsible for lying about it. And I hold society responsible for signing off on this. When adult children or children come and they're struggling with depression and anxiety, and they say, my mom won't leave me alone and blah, blah. And there's teachers who are like, what? Well, what do you mean? I try to talk to her about this or that, and like, she just won't listen to me. Parents teachers, society will instantly is always like, well, you need to understand that, you know, it's very hard being like, we will instantly gaslight a victim of a mother. Whereas a victim of a father, we're like, yeah, no problem. Yeah. Lots of dads are bad people. He should probably go to therapy and figure it out. He needs to learn how to be more present to his kids, blah, blah. But if it's a mother, there's this compulsive knee-jerk reaction to just ritualize and idealize women. These human beings cannot go wrong. It must be the child's fault. It must be that the child doesn't understand something. And these adult children also gaslight themselves. Like, there are so many clients who will admit that their father was a bad father, and they will get so defensive if you point out, well, it doesn't seem like your mother was very present to your needs. It just sounds like she was very anxious and compulsively whatever. But whatever it wasn't for you. It was, she was managing, you know, whatever, and she deserved to get help and she deserved to have support. But let's not pretend that it is anything other than what it was. It was her soothing her own compulsions and anxiety and making you, right, being okay with just harassing you into like agitation and anxiety. So I beat up on mothers in that situation. But this is a problem everywhere, right? This is a problem with men and business and women. And I think we've gotten a little bit better. I don't know, I'm not out there. But it's the same thing. Why do men mansplain to women? Why is it that, you know, I read a book once written by a Navy SEAL who started a school to help women gain more assertiveness and deal with how hostile the environment is. And it starts with sort of like martial arts and just learning a basic presence and a way to not allow those things. And some of the stories that they shared were just like gross, right? One of the stories was a woman who had developed and written the code for a software which was pretty revolutionary and was like knocking doors down, and she would go to companies to pitch this, and companies would be very interested. Yes, we're very interested, blah, blah, blah. And she had an assistant who was a man, and she would show up, and the reps of the company would refuse to talk to her, and they would talk to her assistant, and they would ask the assistant questions. Now, what do we do if X, Y, or Z happens? And he'd be like, well, you should ask her. Like she would start to explain it, and they would like very quickly go, okay, and then they would go back and ask the assistant again because he was a man. She was the one who wrote the code. In that particular story, she decided that she was going to play the game, and she allowed that to happen. And she made an extra 250 grand, did some deals, and went out and bought herself like a super, super nice sports car and was like, this is what I'm doing with this. I'm not recommending that. I'm just saying these behaviors on the part of men have been offered to men, that this is your role. This is where you're meaningful. You're not meaningful as a whole human being with these other components. You're meaningful in this role. This is what you are. So it becomes ritualized. Like those men who were dealing with her are smart enough to know that women invent shit. Like you're literally not that dumb. You're not. But what happens is people freak out and they get anxious, and they just back into the ritual. Well, this is what everyone said. This is what you do. You go to be a good person. You go to church and you kneel down and you pray this way. You put your hands this way and you say these words. And I said those words. Therefore, I'm a good person. Right? And that's men doing that. It's the same thing. It's the same thing in the dating scene where men act really gross. You know, where you'll see this behavior where a man on a bus or something will be like, hey, honey, like you smile, like you have a wonderful smile. And the woman's kind of like, fuck off. Like, I'll configure my face however the hell I feel like configuring my face. And then the man's like, oh, really? Oh, I was just being nice to you, you F and B. Like, those men who are doing that, they're not that dumb in all components of their life. People see those kind of videos and they go, oh my God, are people really that stupid? No. A lot of those people are not that dumb in all components of their life. And if you caught that person in a moment of grace where they're really relaxed and maybe they had a beer and they're just barbecuing and they're hanging out with friends and they were interacting with someone's wife or something, if everything was safe and careful, they can totally relate to women as humans. It is in these moments where these ritualized, like that's a high risk situation. It looks dismissive to women, but that man in that moment is highly activated, full of adrenaline, is thinking all these thoughts of like, well, oh, my buddy's like hit on this woman one time and blah, blah, and he ended up getting laid and, you know, he's the man and blah, blah, and I have difficulty with pickup lines and, you know, I'm going to do it. I'm going to talk to this woman. Like there, you're never going to see that because again, we're not entitled. That's not part of the male ritual. We're not taught that it's okay to really realize that like, I'm super scared and I don't know how to do that. I was always super, super scared. I'm lucky just because I was so antisocial that I just didn't. I'm like, no, the only way I ever dated was I happened to get to know a woman. That's not because I'm better than other men. That's because I've experienced so much intense anxiety at the idea of approaching a woman with romantic intentions that I just never ended up doing the gross things that a lot of men did. not because I'm morally better, but just because I was too scared to do it. It just felt too weird and too gross. So those men who do that are backing into a ritual. They're super anxious, like the mother who just compulsively, right? And then punishes her kids when her kids come and say, like, leave me alone, you're not helping me. And they're like, wow, but I'm just, she's punishing that kid. Do you see when you back out, it's the same move, right? That man is like, oh, well, I'm going to talk to her and blah, blah, blah. And I'm going to acknowledge how beautiful she is. And, but the moment she refuses to participate in that ritual, she's like, I'm not part of your tribe. I'm not doing the tribal dance where you put on these feathers and you do this particular dance. And then I answer with this particular, like, go fuck yourself. No, I'm a human. I'm not doing that. You broke the ritual. You defied the ritual. And then that man, and unfortunately, there is a much greater tendency for men to become violent, right? So sometimes at the very least, she gets cussed out and, called an F and B and a C and blah, blah, and like, and then she's scared, right? Like, this is bad. That's the way in which men go really sideways on this shit. But again, it's like he backed into a ritual. He's very, very rigid. He doesn't know how to be present to the thing and just let what happens happen. And so when she doesn't participate in the ritual, then he punishes her. So let's go back to the mother. It's the same move, right? I don't know how to live. I don't know how to be present, like whatever. I'm just going to run a program. I'm going to play this role. So we started with the word role. I'm going to play this role. I'm going to back into this ritual, and you have to participate in the ritual. And that's what happens with the children of a parent like that, is they're doing all these activities that look like parent-child activities, but the child knows it has nothing to do with them. They know that parent does not see them. They know that when they have real problems, that parent is entirely incapable and unwilling of even acknowledging that there's a problem. And in fact, when that kind of child has a problem, that parent will become incredibly dismissive, will call them names, will pathologize them, will send them to therapy, will blah, 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 because the ritual is, I do this behavior and you sign off on I'm a good parent. But if the child has an issue and is struggling with something, that means I'm not a good parent and you're not playing the game and you're not following the ritual. And so then that child will get punished, right? Like the woman on the train gets punished for not participating in this ritual that men are convinced is a safe place for them to back into. Ritual. Okay. So I said I would model, there are many, 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 many cases. And I said, I don't want to beat up on, for example, the stereotype of the Jewish mother who's like, well, I'll fix you something to eat. Oh, you're depressed. I'll fix you something to eat. You're going in bankruptcy. Let me fix you something to eat. You're not feeling well. Let me fix you something to eat. You're angry. Let me fix you something to eat. I offended you. Let me fix you something to eat. I don't even know if it's true. I'm just using it to demonstrate this thing. So modeling what it looks like otherwise. Let's say you are this parent, and I've been this parent with my daughter. When my daughter came, I had no idea how to parent. And a lot of my parenting was kind of ritualized. It was the idea of what it is to be a good father, the idea. But I was not paying attention. I was not present and aware and watching my daughter's facial expressions and body language to go, she's an individual with her own personality. I can't just run some program at her because I read a book or because I'm like, I think this is the right way to be. The most valuable thing you can do in any human interaction is to be aware and present, because then whoever that individual is in their own specialness, you can then respond kindly and supportively in a way that's healthy for them. It's about them. It's not about some program that you're running because someone on Instagram ran a meme and said, this is how you're supposed to be with kids, right? So let's take the parent who doesn't know how and doesn't understand their kid, and their child maybe is a bit more advanced emotionally or just is into something that parent has no idea, no way of understanding. This is what it looks like to be present with them. That child comes to you and is like, hey, mom, dad, whatever you are, something happened at school, a friend told me some information that makes me really uncomfortable with their parent, whatever. I'm trying to make it as complex as possible. So it's maybe something that the parents don't know how to deal with. And this child really creates complex social relationships, whatever. And the parents were not raising that kind of thing, and they don't. This is what the parent says to be present. First, you ask lots of questions. What did they say? How did you feel about it? Do you have any ideas for how to deal with it? Off the top of your head, is there anything that we could help you with? And then, rather than signing off on, I'm a good parent, let me make you a sandwich, done, I'm a good parent. You being present means being honest about what's real. So you say something like, you know, honey, you are a bit more advanced in the complexity of how you relate to people socially and emotionally. And that's really, really good. There are lots of times that kids end up being wiser and smarter than their parents. In fact, that's probably how, if the human race is going to make it, that's probably how things should be. And I want to be really honest with you. I know I'm kind of leaving you in the lurch, and I know I'm not really giving you an answer. But I want to tell you, I see you. I see that you're dealing with something that I don't quite know how to help you with. I want to tell you, I love you very, very much. And as long as you want me to, I'm going to listen to you, and I'm going to come back, and I'm going to listen again and again. And if there's any way in which I can support you and show you that I love you and help you with this situation, I'm going to do it. That's what I'm going to do. And I also want to own the fact that I get that I'm more primitive, and I don't exactly know how to help you. That move right there has so much more value, infinitely more value than the parent who does some primitive ritualistic thing and goes, okay, kid, you now have to sign off on me being a good parent because I backed into my ritual, and that's what society told me is good parenting, so screw you. I don't care how difficult the situation is for you. Even if you can't offer something concrete, the fact that you will honor and be honest about who you are and what your limits are, and the fact that you see your child and you see that partially they're kind of alone with this, acknowledging that they're alone with it and that you don't have an answer for them, and doing it genuinely and lovingly actually leaves them not alone in it. But if you freak out because you don't know what to do and it weirds you out, and you start having overwhelming feelings of shame and anxiety, and you start having a panic attack because the truth is you have no idea what your child's talking about, and you never dealt with anything at that level of complexity, and blah, blah, and you start saying, well, I think you make things too complicated. You know what? You're just too sensitive. You need to toughen up. You're trying to squash your kid and lop off their emotional limbs because you lack the complexity and the expansiveness of experience to offer them help. Well, instead of doing an enormous emotional existential damage to your own child, why don't you just own the fact that they're more complex than you? Just own it. And that is not a shame. That is phenomenal parenting. It's phenomenal parenting. It's phenomenal parenting. It is parenting that will leave your child feeling so loved and so seen. You acknowledging that I'm limited in how I'm able to see you. And that hurts me, and I'm sorry about that. And I'm going to keep working on that. But I also know that I'm limited. But I'm going to keep coming back, and I'm going to keep working at expanding my understanding and helping you when I can. Leaves them feeling seen because you're not lying about what the situation is. You're not pathologizing them and going, well, if you're dealing with something that I don't know how to deal with, it just means there's something wrong with you. Well, that's a shitty move, right? And you're also not going, oh, here, let me make you a sandwich, problem solved. And then when they're like talking to the therapist 2 years later, like I felt really abandoned, and then the therapist brings you in and you try to do some family work, and you're like, well, I tried as hard, I did everything I could. No, you didn't. You backed into some bullshit, meaningless ritual of something that you can tell society, and most of society is ignorant enough about this level, or they don't have time to immerse themselves in your dynamic with your child. They're just going to assume that you tried your best and that you really are a good parent and that your child is whiny. You're going to get what you want. Society is going to sign off on it, and they're going to blame your child too. If nobody else is going to stand up against this bullshit, and there are lots of people, I'm not doing some big blah, blah, blah. I'm another voice of people that are finally starting to call this stuff out. This is bullshit. It's laziness. You're not helping anybody. That parent is not helping anybody. Just retreating into a role, retreating into ritualized behaviors is a way of abandoning yourself and abandoning the people that you're pretending to attend to. And the thing that makes it grosser, again, when men go wrong, it tends to be with violence. No excuse for that. The thing that makes this particular thing so damaging when it's done by mothers is that society has not developed the awareness to understand that when mothers compulsively engage in very primitive, limited caregiving behaviors, compulsively over and over and over and over, they do, and it's incredibly dysregulating. Their child knows, not only am I not heard and there's no chance of me actually genuinely talking to my parent, but I am harassed and forced over and over and over to pretend that this person is taking care of me. But in fact, I am having to task my nervous system and my emotions to take care of that person's need to be reassured that they're taking care of me because they offered to make me a sandwich again. This is not good. We talked about at the beginning of the podcast how roles can be useful in just sort of like actually helping raise awareness. When I step into this situation, I need to be aware of what are some structural ways that make everything go better. If I'm participating as a student, it doesn't matter if I'm a CEO who built a multi-billion-dollar, like it doesn't matter, play the role of the student. It's not that you don't have those other skills. It's just, it's very hard for people, like, what are we supposed to do? Randomly acknowledge whatever number of students in there have the capability of leading the class? No, just be the student, right? So in those cases, roles are very, very helpful in oiling the wheels of society and allowing us to interact. I'm addressing what shows up in therapy a lot, are where role-based behaviors and ritualized behaviors get used by very traumatized, very anxious people who are compulsive, who refuse to listen to their children or their spouses or their coworkers or their friends. They refuse to listen as those people try to share with them what their real problem is and what they really want or need. And then maybe be honest. Maybe that want or need isn't appropriate. Maybe you have to go, I'm really sorry. I'm not capable of that, or I'm not willing, right? There's risk in that. But instead of doing that, the person retreats into some compulsive ritual that soothes my anxiety because it gives me something to do in this situation where I don't know what to do. It gives me something to do. But not only that, I'm going to further gaslight and bullshit the person who is asking for my presence and interaction by pathologizing them and telling them, if me offering to make you a sandwich, by the way, it's not about the sandwich. I'm just using that as a symbol of anything that you offer that's really of service to me and my anxiety, and me signing off on, well, you got what you needed. So now if you need more than that, there's something wrong with you. And I'm going to go to society and go, oh, well, I did this thing that means that I'm a good friend, or I'm a good parent, or I'm a good spouse. I did this thing and I can't believe it. It just wasn't enough for them. They're narcissistic and needy. Sometimes. And sometimes you're full of crap. And you just have this compulsive behavior that you go, check, everybody has to check, I'm a good person. So again, let's come back to what the behavior is. I'm limited, very limited in some very significant ways. I would be willing to bet that I'm not a good friend. When I say I'm willing to bet, I know that I'm not a very good friend. It takes a certain type of person. I'm very introverted. I don't stay present to people, whatever. Like if you need a lot of interaction, I am a shitty friend. And I'm working on it. So this is a human condition. I'm not like, when I use examples, it's not like, oh, this person is this horrible person, but no, I do it, you do it, everybody does it. But the way to solve this, the cheat code is, let us stop backing into some meaningless, empty ritual and going, society told me as long as I check this box, I'm a good person. And if you still have unmet needs, it's because there's something wrong with you. The cheat code is, I love you and I'm listening to you and I want to ask questions and I want to understand as much as I can. And I also think that you're more complex in this specific way. You are maybe more advanced or have had more experiences than I've had. And you've passed me up. And you're sharing this with me, and I feel really honored. I feel really honored that you are. And I can also feel that I'm limited and I'm missing something. And instead of just lying about that and pretending that I'm helping you, I want to acknowledge that I might not be helping you as much as you need. And you might be asking me for more. And as long as you're willing to be patient and ask me, I want to try as hard as I can to be that more. I'm going to keep listening and I'm going to keep coming back and I'm going to get better at it. And I also want to acknowledge that I'm not doing a very good job. That has 100% full presence. Because full presence doesn't mean that you perfectly meet the needs of other people. 100% full presence means you're honest about exactly who you are, what your strengths are and what your limitations are, and how that may help or hurt other people. No shame, no blame. There's nothing wrong with you. It's a human condition. We're all struggling, but stop lying about who you are and stop pretending so that you can force someone else to sign off on something so that you can get credit for something that you didn't earn. If you're incapable of earning it, that's okay. That's okay. I'll share with you some personal information. One thing I really appreciate about my dad, we had an extremely difficult relationship and he was quite narcissistic and verbally abusive when I was young. But he had me when he was like 24 or something. It was nuts. I mean, he got married at 17 and I think he had my sister by the time he was 20. I don't know exactly the timeline, but you want to so, like really young and inexperienced or whatever. He was quite abusive. He was quite verbally abusive. When I was an infant, when I was a baby, he would say really terrible things. And in addition to that, my mom had a tendency to sabotage our relationship. And in addition to that, it was like very different personalities. So the ways in which I had huge strengths were things that he didn't really get. And the ways in which he was very talented were things that I was just like allergic to. It's like, I don't care. Like, don't, no, I can't, I don't want to, no. And so there was this big disconnect. And when I was in high school, he read a lot of self-help books and really started working on being more positive and building his business and providing for his family. And I think generally tried to be a better father. And there were moments of grace. He could still be really insulting and narcissistic with me and remain really insulting and condescending. But he would have moments of grace in which he was just honest, where he could just say, well, you know, you've developed some things there. I'm not sure that I completely understand them, but I support you. And if I can help you, I will, but I'm not sure I know exactly what you're doing or where you're going with that, because I don't really understand it. The value of that, even in the midst of a terrible relationship, is probably more terrible than he knows, because he was never able to connect with how disconnected I was and how little I got from him. But those moments of grace, I knew at least for that moment that he saw me and was being honest about who I was and who he was. And I got credit for the fact that my personality had some talents and some complexity and some advancement in the human condition here that he just didn't have. And he would be okay with saying that. The value of that was enormous. The value of that was enormous. So being present, being a good friend, good partner, good parent, good employee, good boss, blah, blah, is not about being able to meet everyone's needs and then feeling ashamed when you see that you haven't. And then either pathologizing the person and going, well, if I haven't met your needs, it's because you're too needy, something wrong with you. Or inventing some ritualized empty behavior and going, well, I did this, so problem solved. Now I want you to fill out my, feedback card and say, well, my boss is very present and blah, blah, blah. I had one. I've had a lot of bosses, so hopefully nobody's trying to guess who this is. I had one boss. Sorry, guys. I had one boss who was intensely anxious and neurotic, like inappropriate, like really inappropriate, but who was really smart and well-intentioned and wanted to do things the right way and wanted to do what all the literature said, this is how you create a healthy organization and blah, 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 and blah, 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 but was so wounded and traumatized. This person was not capable of feedback, just wasn't capable of taking, wasn't. It was just too painful, too triggering, like just massive panic. And this person would force themselves to have meetings and then to do what is considered good leadership at the end of the meeting, say, I want to open it up, and if there's anything that you need, or if you want to give me feedback about how, about my leadership and, blah, blah, blah. And first of all, everybody knew. It's like, you do not touch that, man, because this person's just gonna, you just can't handle it. So first of all, people are not going to be honest. When bosses do that and they're too narcissistic to take the feedback, everybody knows they're not going to give you actual feedback. They're not going to tell you. They know you can't hear it because they've already sent messages, and the information has already been there. If you were a leader whose eyes were open, you would have seen the signs of discomfort already, and you wouldn't be doing it in the first place. Right. But people, a few brave souls would think, well, I should probably, and they would attempt to give feedback. And you could just see this boss like struggle and then interrupt and go, okay, so I'm hearing you say that, okay, so I need to work on that, blah, blah, blah. And of course, nothing would change. So again, like that person, I'm not mad at that person. Like whatever had happened, there was like some terrible wounding, in which case it was almost impossible for that person. You could just see the panic set in, that someone might genuinely go, you're not perfect. Or maybe you even badly screwed up and effed this up. And this boss would badly do really inappropriate things and would badly screw up. So, so the fear might have been founded in reality. But that's a case where it's like, you don't need to judge that person. That person needs support and help, but that's ritualized, right? I am going to employ this ritualized behavior that everyone signs off on as being a good boss because I'm willing to take feedback in my leadership and incorporate your needs and your feedback and honor you as an intelligent member of this team, blah, blah. But the person was entirely incapable of actually listening. And then would do the thing at the end of the meeting. It's like, here's the sheet, fill this out, how it went. Well, it's just ritual. Like we're all just doing a tribal dance and going, okay, you do this dance. Okay, I'll do these steps. Okay, you wave these feathers. You paint this on your face. I'll wave these feathers. I paint my face. Everyone goes, okay, problem done. God signed off on it. The ranger are going to come and the hunters are going to bring down a bison and we're going to eat. It's superstitious, primitive bullshit. I don't blame the primitive people. They were operating with what they had. Modern humans, our lives are hard too, different ways. The cheat code is don't pretend. Don't pretend that you're listening and that you're present and that you're attending to people's needs, when in fact you retreat into a compulsive ritual because you're really, really scared. And again, as big offender as anybody on the face of the planet. When I started teaching, I was still so deep in such intense trauma, PTSD, anxiety. When I use the word excruciating, I'm not kidding. It was excruciating. I had to force myself. And one thing I'm proud of, I know what healthy teaching is and, blah, blah. I knew I was not really open to students being like, hey, could you help us this way, blah, blah. I just tried super, super, super hard to be a really, really, really good teacher, but I didn't want any feedback. But I'm proud of the fact that I knew that I was not allowing any information to come back. And I'm also proud of the fact that a few years in, as I solved some problems for myself psychologically and emotionally, and sort of resolved a significant amount of PTSD, that I started actually being very genuine with people and going, what are you guys like? How do you guys feel? Did that make sense to you? Like, did you get it? And it was really scary at the beginning, but I slowly sort of learned, and my body learned, that it's like, that's just good teaching. It's silly. Their brains come with everything they come with, all their preloaded like, why would you think that you would say the perfect thing and every brain in the room would receive it perfectly? That's asinine. Of course, half the people are not getting it, or the whole group's not getting it the first time, or you have your brain is your way. I'm hyperverbal and overly intellectualized thing. Like, of course, like it's the human condition. Just be like, okay, so how did that go sideways? I think, blah, blah, blah. And then I got really good at just coming up with another explanation. If I ran out, then I would panic. But then I got really good at going, I'm not sure. I need to think about it. So this is what I'm going to do. I don't have an explanation now. I need to relook at this lesson and think about how people receive it. And I'm going to think of different ways to demonstrate it. Give me a day and I'm going to come back and I'm going to come at it from a different direction. We're going to see if that works. And I'm super proud of that. I'm not proud of it like, oh, I'm a smart person or a better person. I'm proud of it because there's so much peace in just being humble and being human and just letting the human condition be the human condition. And instead of trying to be perfect and problem solve and have the right answer, going, I'm just going to throw this out there. What worked, what didn't? Okay, let's go with what worked and let's add to that. Okay, what worked and what didn't? Okay, let's throw out what didn't work and add to what worked. Like, just keep doing that and doing that and doing that. And you become more and more deeply attached to just presence and asking lots of questions, presence and asking lots of questions, presence, ask lots of questions, spend a lot of time asking lots of questions. And then when you don't get it, tell the person, I really like what you're doing. It's super interesting. And this is what I'm getting about it. And I also know I'm a bit limited. And I know I'm not seeing as much as you're creating something here that I'm not completely seeing. And I'm bummed that I don't get to. But I love the fact that you're way past me. I love it. I'm limited. I'm sorry that I'm limited. I see this with my daughter. My daughter is really artistic and has a highly refined sense of color, construction, artistry, like just, it's amazing. You watch her put things together and construct things and imagine ways that something can happen. And she gets frustrated with me because she'll be like, Dad, I want to do a word working project. And she'll describe how it wants, and it's like complicated, it's complex. Like I'm a crappy carpenter. I don't even know if I can pull that off. Like a lot of times I don't even understand. It's great. When I look at one of her pictures and just say, you know, I love the colors that you chose. Like, how did you even think of that? How did you make those colors? And then, you know what, honey? I'm not visually very developed. And I love how, like, you were born and you as a person have so much awareness and complexity and control of the visual medium. And I don't. And I can feel that. I love watching you do it. And it's okay. Like, you're just way better than me. That's cool, right? Honesty and presence about who you are and who the other person is. And then just with no shame, without shaming yourself, be honest when you're limited. Don't back into some ritualized behavior and force the other person to participate in pretending that you helped them when you are backing into ritualized behavior to soothe your anxiety, to soothe your shame that you don't have enough to meet them. And certainly don't pathologize and insult them by going, well, if you have a problem that I don't have the wherewithal to meet your needs, it's because there's something wrong with you. Because who I am is enough for any needs that should be met. And if you have needs that I can't meet, there obviously is something wrong with you. Don't do it. It's gross. Don't do it. Don't do it. I'm sure I've done it. Anyway, you guys. Again, my apologies to the cultures or the genders or whatever where I used a particular stereotype. I use it as a model. And yes, those stereotypes do show up, and I have clients who suffer with that sort of thing. It doesn't mean anything extensively about that particular culture. It's just an easy model to hold up and go, look, this is the principle of how this works, right? I'm always talking about the principle of how the thing works. The principle of how it works for men and their rituals and how they interact with women. Don't be the guy who's like, oh, so you're beating up on men? Like, oh, you think that's, no, I don't think anything. It's just a model that demonstrates a principle. It's like, oh, you think mothers are responsible for like abusing their children? Like, no, I don't think that. That's a model that I can extract the principle from. And yes, there are men who do great damage by being that way. And there are women who are mothers who do great damage by being that way. And there are people in every role of life who back into some ritualized, empty behavior so that they can just sign off on, I did it. Now you have to sign off on it too. No, they don't. Not if you didn't meet their need and it was your responsibility to meet their need. If it's your responsibility to meet their need and you're not capable of it, then your responsibility is to tell them honestly without shaming them or without insulting them. I have some limits, and I'm sorry that I do. I love you. I am present and I am listening, and I'm going to keep listening, and I'm going to get better. But I also want to acknowledge that you are something more complex than me, and I am not able to meet your needs in the way that you deserve, and I'm sorry about that. That's the only, it's that easy. It's that cheat code. All right, guys. That was a little dense, but I hope is of help. And I hope you guys have a wonderful day. And I will see you guys next time. Take care.
Just for today, everything's okay, everything's okay.